We have 2 type A women in the room with 2 producers, 3 producers. We have multiple type A women, 3 producers. Josh, who's not type A at all, but very strongly creative. So we've got a lot of cooks in this kitchen, and we are deciding not to have an agenda.
Yeah, no agenda.
We are diving in head first.
That's it.
Dear Gabby style, because Sex with Emily is here.
Yeah.
You are here.
So happy to be
and
here.
Dear Gabby is here.
Yeah, we're here together. There's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot to cover.
I was very excited to meet you. We met originally in New York City. We went out to dinner with some of our mutual friends, Michelle Promolico, Marie Forleo, and we had a little tea. You had a wine. We casually chatted, and I was like, "Hell yes, get me in this room with this woman." It took us a while.
Yeah,
to
it
get
was a
together.
few months ago.
But I always believe that when there's any kind of hold up, it's because I'm supposed to meet somebody at the exact right time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was able to be at your show. Because now I know you. I was like, Gab, I'm coming to your show.
Yeah, you just came to my show. And we're sisters now.
I know, exactly. I feel that.
Yeah, but I needed you. I loved being able to just dive in and have a sex expert on speed dial.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the best.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been in this field for 18 years.
Almost 20.
Almost 20 years. Sex therapist.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your
sex
show.
Educator. Yeah.
Sex educator. You have your show. You've got your products.
Mm-hmm.
So what put you first? I just kind of want to know, like, why was this your direction? Like, what was
I think why this was my direction is because didn't have a lot of great sex education. Sex was very confusing to me all through my 20s. It actually sucked. I didn't know anything about my body, orgasms, where we grew up, and we're pretty much the same generation, is no information about sex. Yeah. If you had sex ed, it was like fear-based. Don't get pregnant, don't get an STI, but then nobody tells you about pleasure. And I kept like having sex with people, being in relationships, and there was a few things I found. First off, they were always having a great time. My partners were always finishing, having orgasms, and I wasn't. And I thought something was wrong with me, and I was broken because what we saw in media and television everywhere that time is you see man and woman make out, fall into bed, explosive orgasms. And I just thought that clearly everyone's having them. And then you talk to my friends, and be like, oh, last night sex was amazing. And I was always like, what do you mean by that? Like, that's how it started for me, being like, what was your amazing sex life? Because I know mine is, like, in the beginning was great, like making out with someone new and having sex. But then I get into longer term relationships, and I just felt like it gets dull and stale over time. And then I felt my sex was more performative. I was actually faking orgasms, like, into my 30s. And I just had enough already. I just want to understand what makes great sex, what is really going on. And so I started the podcast actually almost 20 years ago, interviewing people about sex. Was not the expert, was just very, very curious. And I found out after that very first episode, and I had like a room full of my friends in San Francisco. That's where I started it. And they were all different walks of life, all different kinds of relationships, like gay, straight, like dating online, all the things. And they were just like, yeah, I don't really know either. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be my path, my future. And then I started, you just have that moment people think about finding the one and they knew. I never had, that was never my goal. It was always about what's my purpose, was always my bigger driver. I've never been oriented towards like, I'm going to have a family and kids. It was like, I get very jazzed by work and making stuff happen. So that was it. That was a turning point. And I threw myself into it to figure out, like, why don't I know this? Like, why is sex so much about men?
What did you find out? What was the first thing you found out?
The first thing, okay, so you know what's funny? The first thing I found out was there's this that a lot of the myths, that everything we know about sex is mostly untrue. For example, men want sex all the time and women don't want sex. Women are frigid and men always want it. The reason why we, and that goes back to, I think, religion and patriarchal views, is that men have this control. And again, I love men, not blaming any of them, but like we just didn't know, because sex has always been about procreation, and procreation was about penetration. Well, it turns out that penetrative sex isn't what feels the best to women. Only 20% of women have an orgasm during penetrative sex. 80% do not. So we need all of these other things to make it happen. So normalize oral sex, foreplay, making out, your partner doing the dishes and helping around the house. Like,
yeah.
Right? That it's a mental game, that our brain is the largest sex organ.
Yes,
I found out that and then I realized, and then I used to blame my partners for not pleasing me. And the big thing that landed initially was like, oh, we're responsible for our own pleasure. We're responsible for being our own best advocates. Whatever kind of partner we're with, they're going to respond to someone who's like fully in her body, knows what she wants. They don't want to be pounding away like a jackhammer and not do it. They just didn't, no one knew. And I silently sat there and been like, guess this is what sex is about. You just pound away, have an orgasm, roll over, and it's done. I was like, but this is so boring. Anyone else think it's boring? And I think we just started speaking up about it. So the thing was just like education, and really, I didn't masturbate really. I didn't really understand it. Not because I even had shame, but shame was a big thing with sex. I realized that, like, you know, some of the biggest killers of our sex drive, I write about this in my book that just came, Smart Sex, is stress, trauma, and shame. Yep. So all those things were getting in the way.
And thank you for that. Yeah.
So that's really what I found out.
But I think that you nailed it. You know, for women, your sex drive is in your brain.
Yes.
If you're not safe in your body, if you have PTSD, if you've got some form of trauma response, if your partner isn't showing up for you in other areas, if you have microaggressions throughout the day with your partner, you don't want to them at night.
No way.
No, you don't.
There's like zero part of you that feels like
you're
fucking.
Still pissed. Mm-hmm. And so it's about, and then, but you said it's on you, and the beautiful thing about that is you're accurate, because I believe that it's on us to really raise our self-worth, do our own inner work, know our values, speak for what we need. In that place, that power shift, and it's not like a gnarly power of like, I've got this, you've got that. You know, it's much more about claiming your own power, allows you to feel safer in your body.
Yeah.
And also allows your partner to give you back what you actually really want.
Right.
Not just even sexually. It all happens before you're in the bedroom. And when that shift happens, I think that anything is possible in the bedroom. I really do.
Yeah, because it's also all energy, right? So if you think about it, if you think about like the feminine and the masculine, if we are just really serving them, but we're not genuinely bringing like my own eroticism or my own arousal, and I'm not explaining what it is I actually need, which is a friggin' process and a journey, and it's always changing. I am the expert, yes, but I'm always learning. Probably we're always on a path. I'm always like, I learn from everybody. I learn from myself, but I realized like, oh, if I am truly in my body, turned on, advocating for myself, it does flip the energy. It does flip what's happening with my partner. And then when I learned our partners, but then when I learned that I actually could figure out, I could sort of think about, well, what do I need to be turned on and have great sex? Like, how do I reverse engineer that? So I started to learn about like what has to happen if there's unresolved resentments. I haven't talked to my partner about certain things. The house is different for everybody, but like, what is my desire style? What's gonna get me there? So I know it can't be a freezing cold room. Like when I first started my boyfriend, I was like dating him, I went to his house and we freezing all the time. He lives in the Palisades. I was like, I will not, like my body, like my nervous system just shut down. So he'd like turn on the air conditioner, turn on the heat, the fireplace. And I just knew that I had to like take a little bit of time. I wanted to catch up from the week. I don't just want to jump right into sex. And so once I was able to start explaining my boundaries, okay, past 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, I'm wiped. Don't even freaking try it. In fact, there's zero sex that's happening after 10 o'clock.
For me, it's 9.
Right?
I'm going to bed.
Exactly.
I'm in bed. Good night.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I had to lay that down because we wasn't like that. Because then what happens, Gabby, then every night I'm like, oh God, he's coming to bed. I don't want it.
And you're winding down, and your
winding
nervous
down.
system is winding down.
Yeah.
And then they feel rejected if you're not. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And then it becomes this vicious cycle. They feel rejected. I don't
I
talk
love
about
that you
it.
said this. But what was it that you just said? Not my boundaries. It was like my sexual, like
My desire style.
my
or-
desire style.
Yeah. So I have this also. So the book that came out
That's in
last
the
year
book,
was
yeah.
I mean, I know you've written like 10 bestsellers that are amazing. This is my second book, and this is my book that was like, this was everything after 20 years. And I realized that there's these. I called it sexual intelligence or sex IQ, because we really do have to be smarter about sex. It's never just one thing that's wrong with your sex life. So there's 5 pillars of sexual intelligence that we can all work on ourselves and be like, what is wrong in this moment? And the first one is embodiment. Like, was I in my body or was I not? You know, if I'm not in my body, I'm not going to feel sexual. One of them is collaboration. If I haven't talked to my partner and resolved things, that's also going to impact my sex drive, as is health. You know, am I on a medication that's going to impact my arousal? So there's a lot of different tricks like that in the book, but desire style is like a few things. That's also another like quiz you can take, or just to understand yourself. Maybe you need a great conversation with your partner. Maybe you know that when you guys go watch a movie together and then you talk about it after and your brains are sparking these ideas, you're like, oh, I'm feeling connected and aroused to you. Maybe for some couples, like, we love when we go hiking together. I come back from that hike, my adrenaline's going, we experience something new, then I want to have sex. You know, maybe it's, you know, just something like kinky, or even like there's something sexual or some domination submission play, like you need your partner to say a certain thing or do a certain thing. So there's just like really understanding what those things are, because I want to set every woman and man up for success.
Yep.
But right now it's like we're like told that sex is this amazing, or sex is this magical thing. We can't really talk about it. You know, when we're younger, we're ashamed, or it's weird, or we feel slutty.
That's our generation, not this next generation. They're talking about it. But we're in the Dear Media house here. They are talking about it.
No, they're talking about, but Gab, I'm telling you, I listened to your Hannah Burner episode. And I have so much to say about that, because cut to, so we weren't really talking about it. I understand now my desire. I understand my sex IQ. Like, oh, this medication could be impacting this. My self-confidence is another, or self-acceptance is another pillar. If I feel bad in my body and I'm walking around all day going, you know, I've gained some weight, or my thighs are rubbing together, or I don't know what I'm doing, and then I get in the bedroom and I'm like, oh, I should be aroused and ready to go. Like, why would I if I've been trashing myself all day, right? So just unpacking all the blocks that get in the way. So realizing this outline for people, I feel like it's helpful for everybody, because I was so listening to your podcast with Hannah about, like, our generation was like, we were assaulted left and right. Like, big assault, little assault, high T, low T.
That's the cost of doing business, what you said.
Yeah.
How up is
There's a price of doing business. Like, okay, I'm at dinner with, I'm 25 years old, I'm trying to cut a deal. You might be staring at my boobs. Okay, that's fine, but I'm never going to sleep with you, but we're going to get the deal done and get, it was just like,
you didn't even notice it.
Didn't even notice it. Didn't
or you'd
even
be like, whatever, I
yeah,
guess.
whatever. Like, that's how men are with women.
Yeah.
It's not that, you know, it was just, that's what you did. And then this neck after Me Too, right? And there's this generation who's like, it. I'm like Hannah said, I'm gonna get on stage and talk about my wrinkled labia, and all this stuff, which is empowering to us, because we're like, I'm just gonna talk about it. But I think that's like the pendulum swinging to them being like, well, you, I'm talking about sex. But then then you go back to the middle and you go, but are we as women, no matter what our age, are we actually still though in our bodies, advocating for what we want? Do we know what pleasure looks like? We get to define sex. Like, it might be one night it's, you know, giving each other a massage, oral sex. It's whatever you want it to be, but like, we actually get to decide. We've been doing it this one way and defining sex as penetration, when there's so many other ways to have pleasure. So until we can get more women, I think, and men too, I talk to everybody, but when we lead, like, they don't know, they will follow us, no matter really who you're with. Once you become more like, let's be in this together. Can we be in a relationship where we both have a growth mindset around sex? Can we commit to this journey? Just like a spiritual journey, just like a health journey, sex is a journey, you know? So figuring out, like, what does pleasure mean to me? So even though I love Gabby and the Alexes and all the things, they're fantastic and authentic and real, in talking to all of them individually, it's like, there's still but do I know what I want? Is it okay to tell my partner what I need? And how do I actually know what I need?
Right.
Does that make sense?
There's a middle ground. Yeah, it
There's
does.
a middle.
Yes, it does. And I think that there's probably a lot of women, my listeners listening right now, they're, you know, medium age, you know, 38, let's say, and up as well. And up, let's go up. And down too. And that, let's say that they're listening, and no matter what their generation's conversation on sex has been, their inner conversation is, red flag, no way, I don't want to fucking talk about it, no thank you, you're terrifying me, don't talk about my labia, how could I possibly get pleasure? There's a lot of that. I'm going to speak for all of them out there.
Yeah.
And they're freaking out, and many women have had sexual trauma. I mean, most of us. And that trauma fucks up your libido, fucks up your nervous system, screws up your sex drive, makes you feel unsafe in your body. And so it's so then conversations about sex then ignite shame, because the shame inside is like, oh God, who am I to even have this conversation? I'm a loser because I can't have an orgasm, or I'm a loser because I don't want sex, and so I can't talk to this woman who's all about sex. And so it's like, this is her inner dialogue right now.
Exactly.
She's like, oh, she's talking about it, and she's so empowered, and I kind of want that, but I also kind of hate her because she's reminding me of what I can't have, and that I'm not like that, and I feel like a loser.
Right.
What do you want to say to her?
Yeah, exactly. So what I want to say to her is that you are just like the majority of women out there who do not have any experience really talking about sex. And I want to honor you and say, and see you and say, you probably have been shamed. You probably have been getting really mixed messages, like be sexy but not too sexy, be confident but not the whole Barbie speech, right? Like be turned on but not too much, be this and that. And we get so many mixed messages about how to show up in the world. We want to be empowered and we want to be in the bedroom, but like we don't want to have slept with too many people. We don't really know our bodies. So I would say that like today could be the first day of the rest of your sex life, in listening to this and saying, no, you know what? I'm actually going to re-examine my relationship to my body and my sex life as it is today and become a student of my own body. Maybe it means I'm going to stop having sex for a while with everybody except for myself. So I can actually take a mirror. I know people get a little uncomfortable with this. Look between my legs, because most women have never done that. And maybe it's when you're like touching yourself, you're masturbating, you'll see like your vulva swells, you get familiar with it. And once you see how friggin' incredible your body is and you actually understand the mechanics of it, then you'll start to have pleasure, orgasm, as long as you give it to yourself. So then with your partner, you're coming fully armed with like, not only bringing my brains, my business, all the stuff I'm doing in the world, but I actually understand my sexuality and my arousal. So the ick factor around sex, it's a muscle, Gab. I have to tell you, so after doing this podcast for so many years and having thousands of episodes, what I realize is there's so many people who email me and they're like, I just listened to 100, literally, I got this the other day. I listened to 100 episodes, Emily, like back to back. And I used to get this years ago. Couples were like, we're driving across country and we just listened to all your episodes. I was like, that's a lot of sex to listen to. But I think it's the repetition of sex talk that's not shaming, that's sex positive. And you realize, like, because the way I talk about sex is like talking about the weather. I think that couples, and I know that couples who actually talk about their sex life in a healthy way, often it takes away all the shame around it. It becomes, it's like almost like a couple learning to cook together or doing a new activity together. Like, so, like my partner and I, for example, will be like, are we having, he's like, having sex tonight? What's it going to be? I'm like, well, I'm exhausted, but like Saturday night, that could be a great night, right? Or some nights, honestly, mutual masturbation. If he wants to get off and I want to get off, it's like low lift. We both know that we're going to do it. We just like literally talk about all the tools we have in our toolkit. And sometimes, you know, we're craving intimacy more than sex. So you just have to learn to unpack it. But to go back to people who are just starting out, just know that 99% of couples, and I'm going to say that, like I'm going to stick to that number, have never talked about sex in a way that is probably useful for their relationship. Because we don't have any examples of it. Maybe we were younger, we grew up in a place where if we talked about sex, we were told that it was wrong. We were told maybe we have to wait till we're married. Perhaps we were told that good girls don't, whatever the messaging is, it still sticks in your brain even if you're 35 now. So I'm just saying it's a practice. A great place to start is saying to your partner, I just listened to Gabby and Emily and I realized we haven't talked about it. Would you be down with just kind of what's the most memorable times you've had sex, and go from there. Like, what do you like about it? What don't you? And then it takes, after a while, couples do this and they're like, oh yeah, we actually look forward to it now. Yeah. Like, why is this the elephant in the room? So I would say it's okay.
Listening to your podcast, reading your books, it's just, even just listening all the way through to the end of this episode is a huge act of surrender. And it is a radical commitment to opening your mind to heal. And it's kind of, you know, whenever we take an action, it is a prayer. And so I think that being in this dialogue with us, just even casually just listening, is a step in the right direction. And it's slow. You're right. You really said take your time.
Process.
Yeah.
But like you said, I mean, also, Gab, like this trauma, whatever it is, sexual assault, I know you had abuse growing up. It's like, it does live in our bodies. It is there. It's our nervous system. We get touched. We're not maybe even conscious of it. A lot of us aren't. That's why some of us start to have memories about things that have happened.
Yes.
And so honoring that and recognizing that is going to take a little bit of work to just sort of get in touch with that, to release that, to do therapies. EMDR therapy is wonderful for it. Doing some exercises on your app.
Somatic experiencing. EMDR. Read Happy Days.
Yeah. I mean, you've done, yeah. I mean, to me, that's a game changer.
I've done the work for them. Yeah. I've done the work for them, and I've written about it. And I think that we should almost like put a prescription together where you give Happy Days and your books together. You know, it's
because
like,
there's
because I was gonna push back a little bit and say, okay, but there's this listener who's completely dissociated. She hasn't been embodied for 25 years. She's, terrified to even have this conversation. She's been having performative sex for decades. Like, and that's like most of my listeners probably, right?
Yeah.
And they're just like so in shame, blah, blah, blah. And so even having these conversations is so terrifying for them. And so I think that's why I want to honor the listener who's still here, because if they're still listening and they have that archetype, which is most, what is it, like 2 out of 3 women or whatever it is.
2 out of 3 women.
They're the 2 out of 3 that are still here listening. You're brave, you're open, you're ready, you're willing. And so any change, particularly a embodied change, a trauma-related change, starts with willingness. And so I think that is the first step. Open Emily's book while you have Happy Days right next to you. Have the 2 books side by side.
Because you have the actual practices.
You got to do the trauma work, and you can open up to celebrating your sexuality and calling the shots.
Yeah, and exactly. And they might be surprised, or probably not surprised. They'll probably see once they start to open up their body to the somatic experiencing and the exercises, this stuff is going to come up because it's all wrapped in together to our families, to our experiences with different genders, whatever our sexual experiences have been, and we will, like, they're so related. And so you could also say, I'm going to take a pause right now, and I'm not going to not have the performative.
That is
what I did at 35.
True. If you're going through,
I stopped. I was like, I'm not having performative sex ever again.
I would advise the women that might be in the real deep dive healing of their sexual trauma right now to find a safe way to communicate with your partner that you're going to take a pause for a little while, because you don't want to be in your trauma recovery and overriding your body at the same time.
Exactly. Take the steps, but once you're in the process of it, it actually means your sex life is beginning. It for real, like your authentic sexual self is learning to present itself. And if you also can reframe it, like I love to reframe the sex talk around pleasure, because pleasure can mean so many things. It doesn't have to just be sex. But the more, and as women, we are so conditional on our pleasure. I'll only buy that thing if I make this much money. I'll only eat that dessert if I worked out today. Like, it's all conditional till we get these rewards, so we get these things. And if we're like workaholics type A's, it's like there's no room for pleasure. And I was on this like retreat a few years ago, or like 10 years ago, and they had us do this exercise. It was called like the pleasure percentage. And I also put it in the book, where they had us write down everything in our life that gives us pleasure. And then we had to do like some math formula, and it came up like 3% of my life I was actually doing things that were, and it was like hanging out with friends, hiking, being with my dog, walking, whatever, picking flowers, cooking, whatever gives you pleasure. It wasn't even sex. And I thought, the more I have learned now to incorporate those things into my life, pleasure begets pleasure. And then I realized that pleasure is actually productive, because when I infuse more of that, I'm like, oh, I'm actually getting more done. I'm feeling good. I'm not just looking ahead. Like, I'll look at my schedule now and I'll say, I've got back-to-back meetings, but where's the pleasure part? So I'm like, I'm going to book a night with friends, a weekend away, a massage for me. So I know that I'm taking care of myself. And that's all part of, that all helps calm our nervous system too. And then we can move into the sex, because sex isn't what people think.
That's such a great takeaway. The pleasure begets pleasure is so radically true. I always say, if you want to create more romance in your life, find that romance in your friendships, right? So it's like you and I going out to dinner and being girls and just like falling in love with each other. Like, that's a sparky energy, and that sparky energy goes home with you. I think that you're absolutely right. If you're caring for your nervous system, if you're stopping and having a massage, or you're taking your time to enjoy your meal, these are moments that really ignite that force within you. I think that does go back to the trauma piece, though. People who have unresolved trauma wounds are not present, and they don't have an awareness of the somatic experience of pleasure, and they don't have that felt sense of pleasure. So it can still, I just want to acknowledge these folks that are listening, because it's kind of like a you to say to them, oh, just go create more pleasure. I understand that. I lived that for many years. You know, my friends Mama Gina and you know, when we had, you know, Sheila Kelly, and they'd be like, find your erotic creature, and I'd find it for 5 seconds on the pole, and then I'd be like, go fuck yourself, because I can't, you know, wear a boa on my internet. And I love them so much, but at that time, and they're right.
They're right, but it's too
much.
much.
At the time, I couldn't. Pleasure was an afterthought.
No, those were my teachers too. But I can tell you all listening,
ladies, it's not anymore.
Yeah, good. Love this, Gab. I love this so much that you're sharing this, because it is like you have to find your people at the, what is it, like when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And so maybe it was too soon for the Mama Gina, Sheila Kelly. I've done all those things too, and but this is the piece, the allowing, the recognizing, the surrendering, and then saying like, okay, then I'm just gonna focus on the trauma. You will see what comes up in your body, because it's all sort of related, because your sexual energy is your creative energy, it's your productive energy, it's all in the same places.
Yes.
So I think once you start to heal it all, you're gonna see that you'll be able to find your path towards your own
And I
pleasure.
remember, I'll go on the record saying that S Factor actually really did help me, even when I wasn't, even when I was dissociated, that when you have a spiritual experience of any kind, the glimmers of light come through. And so I decided that for me, doing S Factor, which is the pole dancing, is Sheila Kelly's S Factor, was I needed to do it with privates. I did it with a private teacher, Erin, who really was like a therapist in many ways, not just like a physical, like a emotional sexual therapist, but not with her words, with her body. And being in the dark room, being private with her, no one's eyes on me except for hers, who were so non-judgmental. Like, I can think my way back into that experience right now, and I do see that there was like, oh wait, it's still in there. It's still in there. It's still in there. And that was and now I'm like, there's a S Factor class that happens in my community in the countryside, and I'm like this is, I'm like, let's get on that pole, guys. Like,
now you're ready to go back to it,
yes,
right? No, I had the same experiences with her. I was like, oh, we're in the room. Because when I first heard pole dancing, I was like, oh, that's another way we got to perform for a man and twist around a pole.
For us.
It's like for us. And I realized, oh, it's for us under being in our bodies and moving our bodies and releasing that energy in a way that helps fuel our creative, sexual energy, chakra, all the things.
And I remember I admitted my sexual, having had sexual abuse as a child. I admitted that, I think, on Regina's stage. I was coming to speak at like Regina's book launch for Pussy, and it's Mama Gina. And I was in the audience, and I'm like crawling out of my skin because she's so embodied, and I'm like, but that's not me. And all these women are like showing up in their thongs, and I'm like, I'm not there. And I get on the stage, and I looked at them, I was like, I'm a fucking fraud, people. I'm not here to talk about my sexual empowerment. I'm dealing with facing into trauma. And everybody stood up, and they were all like, me too, me too, me too.
They me too, I'm sure, because it can be a bit. You know, we all find our people, but we're all doing powerful work out here in different ways, and I think that women find their, you know, and there's not that many of us either, right? Like there's enough sexual. I mean, I think now there's more
not enough folks out there in a very educated way speaking about the empowerment of sexuality, and I do think that you being part of our generation and having that experience of the, like, it's not that I wouldn't want to take sex advice from a younger woman, because I think that the truth is they have a whole other, rapport and toolbox. But, and I do actually listen to them and look to them, because they're just so empowering in so many ways.
Yeah, they're so authentic and open about everything.
But I think that having had the lived experience of having to shut it down and feeling shut down, and then being able to come out the other side, your authentic teaching and education is really valuable. Yeah. Particularly for me.
Oh, good. I love it. We're all in this together. I love it. Thanks, Gab. You too. You've helped me so much. Love you too.
So I want everybody to get your book.
Just get the book and the podcast.
So the podcast, I think people have to listen to on the regular, because just even that act of listening is an act of surrender, is an act of willingness, like I said, a willingness to know more. Then the book, I think, has that clear directive. It's like, okay, here are the steps you can take, because it's one thing to listen to a woman in her power talking about sex. It's another thing to actually take the steps. And so just share a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so a little bit. I mean, the book is How to Boost Your Sex IQ and Own Your Pleasure. And the book really just starts out with my own journey of having performative sex, faking orgasms, all the things, and then going through that process of what I went through. I had to clear out my pleasure thieves, the things that were keeping me from pleasure. And then I had to sort of work around and figure out, like, step by step, what are the things that I have the pillars of sex IQ in there that you can realize, find yourself of the areas of sex that might be where you want to start working on, whether it's your relationship to your body or your relationship to your partner. I have a lot of scripts in the book because what I find is sex is the hardest thing for people to talk about, sex and money. And I give to people, because I tell people all this advice, go talk to it. They're like, but what do I say? So I've got scripts to have healthy conversations about sex.
That's the part I loved the most.
The scripts
like, are fucking
people
awesome.
Don't know. They're like, I get it. I'm feeling empowered, but now what? I've been with my partner for 10 years and we've never talked about sex. So I got you in this book. And then I literally walked through all the body parts. I walked through masturbation, I walked through oral sex, anal sex, all the things, alternative relationships, but really through the lens of sexual empowerment and knowing yourself, and that we all get to decide what feels good to us. And it's fun, easy to read, has a lot of exercises to change your life.
And I think it's really helpful to have that directive, like, these are the steps that you can take, because sometimes you're doing the healing part and the inner work, and then at the same time you want to start to exercise another muscle, for lack of a better word.
No, it is.
Yeah, like
it
you're
is.
exercising and you're changing neural pathways in your brain, and each orgasm that you have starts to adjust your neural pathways and says, oh no, I can do that again. I can have that.
Yeah. I mean, sex is a skill set. I want to remind people,
sex is a skill set.
Spirituality is a skill set.
That's right. You have to exercise it.
I have to be repetition, doing things over and over again to stay in spiritual alignment. Well, if sexual alignment or sex life has been something that's been like, I don't want to talk about on the back burner your entire life, be patient, be kind to yourself, be compassionate, and like just start on the journey in a loving way and see, like, how can I start to unpack this in a way that feels healthy and healing?
Start on the journey in a loving way. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.